Michael Cicero, who's doing all the tech for us, Mark Edwards, and Elijah Akin. We also want to thank our volunteers, Evie, Sarah, Alex and Terry, Nick, and Sarah, Corey Tandler, Rijal, and Jen Youssef. And if I'm forgetting someone, thank you very much. We want to thank Professor Peter Eckersall, who has served as our faculty advisor throughout this process. We want to thank Jim Graham Jones, who has provided us with a couple of awards for some of our participants who were traveling from far away. We also want to thank Professor Martin Carlson for his generous funding that he has provided and for joining us in the conference, as well as Professor David Sabran. We also want to thank Professor Edward Miller for his wonderful opening remarks yesterday. Thank you so much, that was excellent. Some other people we need to thank their class are Ayu Akinci, Patricia Goodman, and of course our other sponsors, the DTSA, the DSC, Doctoral Students Council, the USS, the United Center for Students, and the Sigma Studies Group. If I am forgetting anyone, thank you as well. We really appreciate your help. So lastly, please join us at the archive for a final reception after the keynote speech. The archive is located on 12E 36th Street, so a couple of blocks up that way and to the right. So without further ado, I want to welcome Sarah Bay-Cheng, who is chair and professor of theater and dance at Broaden College, where she teaches theater history and theory, dramatic literature, and digital media performance. Her research focuses on the intersections between performance and media, including histories of cinema, social media, and computer technology in contemporary performance. Recent publications include Performance and Media, Taxonomies for a Changing Field, and Mapping Intermediality in Performance. In 2015, she was a Fulbright Business Scholar in the Department of Media and Cultural Studies at Utrecht University in the Netherlands. Bay-Cheng can be heard monthly as a co-host for the podcast On Tap. Her current book project is Digital Historiography and Performance. This summer, she will assume a new position as Dean of the School of Arts, Media, Performance and Design at York University in Toronto, Canada. Please, let's welcome her.
Thank you all very much. Can you all hear me okay? Wonderful. Before I kind of kick off, I just want to say a big thank you to Mara and Christine and Curtis and Kyun, and I don't know where, Kyun, and also to Frank and Edward, and especially, you know, it's like faculty member to faculty member to Jean and Peter. Like, when graduate students have the autonomy and the freedom to create this kind of intellectual community for themselves and each other, it reflects not only well on them as individual and collaborative scholars, but really well on the mentorship and the guidance and the support that they're getting from their faculty. So thank you to them, and thank you for hosting me and bringing me here. It's been a really stimulating day and a half, and I'm truly excited to be able to be with you. I also want to extend a special thank you to everyone who has presented thus far. I've learned a lot, and one of the things that you know, those of you who are in various degree programs will realize when you get out into the world and are an academic is that it is actually, you know, it's hard to keep up with stuff. There's a lot, and it comes at you really fast, and you get kind of caught up in, you know, committee meetings and annual reports, and there's a whole lot of toil and drudgery that I'm like super privileged to be able to do because I have a job, so don't get me complaining. Just really clear. But at the same moment, right, you lose touch with like where new thought is coming from, and so the opportunity to sit and listen and learn and think in and with you and through the performances that have been part of the last couple days has really been a gift to me. And so I just want to say thank you to all of you, and especially to the organizers who have made that possible. So well done. And now we come to what I often think of as a hallmark of my work, which is the apology and the setting of low expectations. Don't knock it. This is a key to professional success. As far, I'm not quitting yet. Those folks in Canada have no idea how little they're in for. The organizers have created this wonderful thing called Slido, and so we've kind of been using it and kind of not been using it. But as I was standing up here, I was like, oh, we could kind of totally use this. So I started, and I've asked myself a couple of questions, and have stated as myself. I've also posted a couple of anonymous critiques, which I've just de-anonymized. So for you social scientists in the room, bummer. And so my apology is this. Site reference earlier joke about annual reports, committee work, etc. This is a lot of work that I've been playing around with and manipulating and developing for the past several years, and it gets to a point now where I can't remember who I've said what to whom. So if you've heard any of this before, I would like you to act surprised. Because you are theater people, I trust that you can do this with some convincing, as if, magic, whatever it is that you do. That would be great. And to you playing along at home, HowlRound audiences, I would also beg your indulgence. So for those of you who thought like, oh yes, I tuned in last summer at the University of Georgia, you might want to just turn me off right now and be done. What is new in the work that I presented today and the sort of engagement that I'm going to present is that I'm going to try to connect what I've been thinking about for the past, decade, 15 years or so with the ideas that have come out as a part of the conference. And I'm really not very good with names. So I will try to tag and cite reference, right, as I can sort of visually, so I might point at you. If you have your name tag, you can flash it so I remember right, who you are. But I'm going to try to kind of pull some of the ideas that have been circulating over the last day or so together in ways that are hopefully coherent. Even better, it would be interesting, and if you laugh at my jokes, that would be a great gift to me. The other thing that I'm going to try to do, again, which I will probably fail, so don't raise your expectations yet, is that if you want to log in and start giving me stuff on the Slido app, I'm going to attempt. Is it what? It's not Slido. It's Slido.
It's Slido.
Oh, okay. I thought I had correction over here, which would have been excellent, because that would have been a mistake in which we could lower the expectations even further. I will attempt to respond in real time. So if you don't want to interrupt me by raising your hand or shouting out, "What's wrong?" You can go to the app and be like, "What's wrong?" And then I will try to engage with it. Yes.
B187.
B187. And what would be really amazing is if people are. Is this being live?
Yep.
Okay, so this is live streamed, and you want to also play along at home. Feel free, and I'll kind of figure out what I can do, right, into incorporate. And sorry, what? I will welcome your interruptions and interlocations. Jean Graham Jones. Yes. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to treat this like. Are you looking for a chair, sir? Would you like to come in? Okay. All right. That's
Can I just say the code again, because I know it's one of those things.
B187.
Yeah. So just go download the app or go to sli.do and just enter the code B187.
Okay. And again, for everybody who couldn't hear Curtis. This is, the app is SLI.o.
No, SLI.do.
Oh, I'm sorry. SLI.do. And the code to not throw snark at somebody else who's not ready for it is B187. Okay. Are we on board with this?
Yes.
Okay.
Hell yes.
I'm just checking to make sure nothing. Oh, okay, marvelous. Yeah. You can also thumbs up in the. Okay, so thumbs up. So if I'm ignoring something, go thumb something a bunch of times, and I'll try to pay attention to it. So I've got that over there. I also felt like, in deference to being invited as a lecturer and a scholar of these things, I should prepare some stuff. So basically what I'm going to do is kind of give you some stuff I've been thinking about for a while. Peter is like, okay, get on with it. Good, okay, moving. Okay, this is an incredibly important quote. I've circulated it in other contexts, and it's been kind of my organizing principle for easily the last 8 to 10 years or so. This is Marshall McLuhan leaning over a television. TVs have come up in a variety of ways over the course of the last day or so, whether those are literal televisions, whether those are metaphorical televisions in terms of the screen. It was in the title of Edward Miller's talk when he talked about slow TV. And I'm going to take a little bit of issue with you over here, Edward, which is that when he held up the screen, he's like, if you turn it, it's cinematic. And to a certain extent, the aspect ratio is. But more than anything else, what we seem to be engaging with when we talk about screens and performance is we're really talking about manifestations of the television, right? And this has come up in a number of conversations about negotiations of public and private and intimate and shared and domestic spaces and public spaces. And it seems to me that long before we have social media and other kinds of performance, what you really have is TV as a kind of, in-between space of theater and cinema and radio, right? It becomes this kind of an amalgamation, and in many ways, social media is kind of like TV to go, right? And I don't have a clip of it, but if you saw I think it was for AT&T, the Mark Wahlberg ad a while ago, where he walks around and he's like, I want a TV there, and I want a TV there, and I want a TV there, and like the whole world is turning into TVs. And if you're like me and you have occasion to sit at home with your various screen devices, you kind of made like that happen, right? You've now surrounded yourself with TVs. But it's not just that TVs are consumption, and this is where I think we differ, our mobile technologies differ radically from the cinematic, which is that they become they're not just consumption devices, they're production devices. And like television production, they're mobile and they're vertically integrated, right? So you now have the means of production, post-production, pre-production, and distribution in your pocket, right? On a model that is much closer to television than it is to the cinematic, right? So this is McLuhan, and I came across this quote a number of years ago. It's from his book From Cliché to Archetype, and it's in the essay on anesthesia. And it's where he talks about, and so he talks about Sputnik and the satellites. My iPad is like tiny, so I can't really read this. So, since Sputnik and the satellites, the planet is enclosed in a man-made environment that ends nature and turns the globe into a repertory theater to be programmed. Can everybody read it? Because you can sort of follow it. I hate when people read these slides. It's like, okay, I can read it. But there's a number of things happening in here that I think are really important to our current moment. One is this idea that a technology is globally pervasive, right? So long before we had, iPhones, we had satellites that literally covered the globe. The second is this idea of nature having been something that could be ended, right? Remember, this is 1970. Right? So we don't even have silent spring yet, but this notion that somehow technology could be positioned in an adverse relationship to nature such that what we think of as the natural world could meet an end through human technology. And it was not presented as an apocalyptic image per se, it was simply presented as a matter of fact, right? That once the satellite and satellite technology can touch every piece of the globe, which is true and has been true for a number of decades now, there's no place where nature exists unmediated. Not a single inch on the planet where nature exists, right, absent technology, right? So the natural environment, the construct of nature is something that McLuhan points to. And then of course for theater people, right, in the midst of feeling like, oh, media is going to kill us off any moment, and this notion of that we're just perpetually dying and being reborn and dying and hanging on by a thread, and I feel like theater is kind of like the soap opera villain, right, of the arts, you know, it's like we were decapitated and we still come back. You know, we're like vampiric on culture. That was my site too. Where did she go? Right? The vampire. Okay. Right? Did you get vampire to Reese Pen? Okay, good. That somehow, right, that it's like this idea that we, it's this assertion that what we have now is really just a mode of theater. And several times over the last couple of days, people have talked about like, ooh, it's like theater, or oh, look, this technology looks like theater, or all of a sudden we're starting to question the authenticity of a social media persona. I'm thinking of Taylor Black's talking about the robot, you know, Instagram Michaela, little Michaela, and this idea of like, oh, it's like theater. And one of the really weird things that I personally and a number of other people have found is that as you get more and more imbricated and deep within digital culture, the more it seems to approach the conditions of theater. So the further it seems you go from what we have often and have sometimes positioned as the sort of ontology of live performance, right? The further you get away from that, the more things start to look and feel and sound and act like theater. And that notion is one that is deeply connected to what McLuhan is talking about in this quote, right? And the last idea is that when we live in those conditions, right, when we live in a theatricalized world, when we live in a denaturalized world, when we live in a hyper, right, connected, right, remember this is you know, also on the heels of his notion of the global village, that looks and feels like theater, and it means that everybody is performing. So there are deep connections here to surveillance. And what has come up in a few panels and conversations, both literally named as self-surveillance, but also alluded to, and I'm thinking about, you know, different kinds of performance documentation, right, to be, and what it is to be watched, and what it is to watch oneself, or hear oneself, or make work, and then reflect on it in and through media, right? And so the classic example here is, oh, I hate the sound of my own voice, right? That sort of thing. I will say, having done a podcast, I've learned to get over that. I just kind of listen and grit my teeth and be like, well, I'm very low expectations for this, right? So it kind of all works out in the end. Okay. I want to drill down a little bit into what, are there any questions yet?
Yes.
Oh, okay. All right. So now, first interruption, we're now at question time. Oh, some of this is familiar. Oh, that's me. It is. Does the cinematic still exist, or has it been absorbed by the televisual? You know, I tend to think, and a lot of my interest in this stuff is always thinking about things in terms of spectra and scale, rather than ontological is and is not binaries. And I would say, for those of you who know some of my work, right, this is kind of how I talk about theater and media as being on this kind of continuum where if you read the taxonomy book, you know, one of the ways I kind of talk about things there is this idea of a spectrum or spectra between absolutes that don't actually exist. And I would say the same is true here, right, which is that the cinematic and the televisual as in relation to one another become one of scale, in which the cinematic scaled down small enough is almost indistinguishable from the televisual, and the televisual scaled up large enough is indistinguishable from the cinematic. Which is not to say that there aren't interesting characteristics and distinctions between those two forms. I do take note of sort of technologies that distinguish and the sort of visual or aesthetic characteristics of, say, 16mm film. Or a you know, a media maker like Sue Friedrich, who, you know, in her early work on celluloid would scratch words onto each of the frames so that when it played in real time, you got this kind of scratchy, wonderful animations that were really kind of, you know, felt tactile and intimate and connected. And then when she could no longer afford film, because film, of course, has now become so profoundly fetishized and rare that now it's a very expensive media. When she shifted to video, she played around with the same idea, like trying to put like animated, and it just didn't have the same feel to it. Of course, then you sort of like think, oh, well, that's dead, and then Snapchat comes along, and you're like, oh no, look, everybody's Snapchat and sort of commentary and annotation on top. So sometimes you just have to wait for technology to kind of catch up to certain kind of techniques as they move forward. So that I think this is kind of one of scale. And speaking of scale, I want to turn to one of the issues that's been touched on in a number of pieces, particularly in the last panel this afternoon, which I really appreciated, which is the question of surveillance and self-surveillance. And for me, this all really hinges with Susan Sontag's work in On Photography, where she talks about and predicts a future of video, right? So she's talking about video in the 1970s, and she's thinking about the video as an extension and a continuation of photography. And her prediction there that she says, you know, eventually, as video gets more and more accessible to the average person and to consumers, eventually we will all turn to, and this is the quote, narcissistic self-surveillance. And I love this quote, almost as much as I love McLuhan and his, you know, surveillance, or, you know, his satellite proceeding to be programmed. And the best example that I've ever found of Sontag's prophecy fulfilled, if we can say, is in the form of this idea of self-documentation. And so this is the Microsoft research LifeSense project, and this was to help people with Alzheimer's, right? So it was about triggering memory when you were forgetting it. But then it got turned into, and this is a pretty early prototype that I donated to on Kickstarter and downloaded their video before they got rid of it. So this is what was called the Momodo camera, and it was a wearable camera. Well, I'll let you tell them all about it yourself.
Sometimes the best moments in life are the simple ones. The things that pass us by without us even noticing. The small surprises. And the everyday experiences. At Momodo, we love the simple moments, but we hate forgetting them. So we started thinking, what if we could capture those moments and create a true photographic memory? What if we could build a camera small enough to never be in the way and smart enough to capture life as we live it? This is what we ended up with, the Momodo Life Logging Camera. It's small, light, weather protected, and takes beautiful 5-megapixel pictures.
That was a big deal then. That was really great.
That starts taking pictures. Put it down or place it in your pocket, and it stops. It's that easy. And all the pictures are safely stored on Momodo's storage service. We know what you're thinking. 2 photos a minute is a whole lot of photos, right? Well, to make things as easy as possible, we developed apps for both iPhone and Android that automatically organizes the photos on a timeline. Want to remember the name of the restaurant last night? Easy. Thanks to Momodo's smart algorithm, GPS, and time data, you can just search, find, and share. We're really passionate about getting this product out into the world. We've been working for a year to develop the camera and apps, and we have a great team on the job. But we need funding to start production of the first 1,000 cameras. Help us reach this goal and be one of the first to wear a Momodo camera. Reserve one today.
Okay, so I've been showing this film for a while because I love it more every time I watch it. What's amazing is that the first time I showed this, it was in the context of surveillance and data valence, and this was now like, you know, 6 or 7 years ago, and the response from everyone in the audience was utter horror, right? It was just like, oh, right? And in fact, you know, not undeservedly, like in fact, I donated to this, and I actually have that Momodo t-shirt, right, that black t-shirt, but I wasn't allowed to actually get the Momodo because nobody in my house would let me have it, because nobody wanted to be documented every 30 seconds of their waking life. And nobody trusted the algorithms, right, that would make this wonderful. And so I really, and Momodo actually, it ended up changing its name to the narrative clip. It got I believe last I heard that company had gotten bought by Google. And this predated the Google Glass fiasco, and I was like, okay, well this is not going anywhere, right? And then very shortly after this was playing, was when like fitness trackers hit the market. And then not long after that, CE2, the Consumer Electronics Show, or CES, had like technology is you in the wearables. And now it's like, I mean, you know, I feel like you can only be a real New Yorker if you've got like little white things hanging out of your ears. And of course, you know, I wear an Apple Watch against my better judgment. And I'm surrounded by all these technologies that are, you know, and now we've got the digital personal assistants that are talking to us all the time. And so I thought, you know, this is like Sontag and McLuhan would be both so happy and so horrified, right, by the conditions. And this really does not seem to be going anywhere soon, right? This is just now. And every year it becomes more and more the conditions of the world in which we live in. And so coming back to this idea of what is it in the natural world that ended, and what are we replacing that nature with? Now I'm going to turn to some questions. Is performance always imbricated with surveillance? Yes. If you don't know the work of Elisa Morrison or James Harding, they do really great stuff on surveillance. And my favorite from James is he has this wonderful phrase, which is if surveillance then performance, right? And so now it's like, yeah, of course, like everything is a performance. What's interesting is now everything is a measured performance, right? The quantified life, and the ways in which we are all now measuring what we do, and also feeling an ever-increasing drive towards productivity, right? Like how to get the most out of your day, how to produce the most that you can, how to you know, become a more efficient worker, a more efficient writer. You know, I'm sure some of you are following all the like hashtag M writing, hashtag ACA writing, you know, trying to generate things. I think one of the most important, and that's all important. I'm gonna look for Gene. I'm like, oh, that's all. You write more. Very important. You know, but honestly, like one of the most important books that I've read in the last decade or so is Jonathan Prairie's 24/7, Late Capitalism and the Ends of Sleep, right? And you realize, like, oh, taking a nap can be a radical political act, right? I can hear my neighbor screaming at Alexa through the walls. I am sorry. That I can imagine. The deep ocean, is that mediated? Okay, fair. You have found a piece of nature that we have not gotten to yet, but give us time. All of it? I thought we weren't all the way in the Meridian Trench, are we?
Well, there's a picture today of a dive landing and finding some rubbish.
Oh, look! Oh yeah! Oh yes! Of course! Yes. Okay. So those of you playing around at home, you couldn't hear Peter. They have found rubbish at the bottom of the deep ocean. So we win. I will also say that I have a colleague, Mike Polster at Bowdoin College, who's a photographer, and he's been traveling to Hawaii to photograph plastic that is now being melted into the geologic record. So because of the lava flows and the rapid and geologic activity in and around Hawaii and the volcanoes, that we are now getting geologic strata of plastic, right? So we are now fully into the Anthropocene, and it is creating a geologic record that will certainly outlive us all. Has the carnivalesque ended now that any given transgressive personal experiment can be captured and stored forever? Okay, I'm just gonna like side note, when I read the carnivalesque, I thought you were like saying like, is this over and can you get back to the real stuff yet? And I was like, I'm so sorry. But then I read it and I'm like, oh, that carnivalesque. You know, I feel like I want to like punt to someone who's read Bakhtin more recently than I have, and perhaps pronounces his name correctly. you know, I think that in many ways, the sad answer to something like this is that you know, all the outsides have been colonized and corporatized and are kind of continually being drawn into the middle. I wonder to what extent that as soon as things become in the inside, one then also feels compelled to create and move to an outside. And I think some of what is happening right now in a very broad sense, and I'm open to critique and contestation on this, is that I think that, and I feel like some of the political movements around trans rights in particular and youth movements against climate change and trying to hold politicians and policymakers to account, and Black Lives Matter and a number of other social movements feel like they are also staking out important outside areas and are kind of re-territorializing space and invigorating outsider culture as a way of mounting a critique. So I don't know that the carnivalesque has totally ended, but certainly, again, thinking less about overdone, etc. I think obviously there's a kind of tension there that is always in play, and that we all, every time we take out our phones to, you know, snap an Instagram pic or you know, post a selfie or engage in some kind of activity on Twitter, we both resist and perform into it at the same time. So I think there's a kind of feedback loop there. But again, I welcome disagreements to that idea. Oh, did you have a, okay. A couple other fun photos here for you. This is, oh gosh, what was this? Okay, this is, I'm sorry, oh, this is, thank you, this is the 2005 people who had gathered at St. Peter's to witness Pope John Paul II's body being carried into the Basilica for public view. Okay, so this is from the Associated Press in 2005. This is the installation of Pope Francis at St. Peter's Basilica in 2013. 2005, 2013, 513. Right, and so, like, again, you know, I look at this and I think, you know, I mean, one of the interesting things is these are two different photographers, but in a very similar position and with a very kind of similar relationship to the crowd that they're taking. But again, this reminds me of McLuhan in the way in which he's sort of thinking about this. And one of the other things I wanted to introduce into our conversation about screens that also goes to the televisual is that for me, what I'm noticing in a lot of contemporary performance, both popular as well as of art performance, is the emergence of boxes. And so I have a couple of my favorite examples of this. And this one is one that I use a lot and I show my students, and I'm a pretty big fan. Or it would be, there we go. Similar kind of aesthetic, right? All the photos. This is Beyonce's Formation tour. I don't know if any of you got to see this live. If you did, don't tell me about it. Other people in my family got to see it live. I don't want to know. But really, I'm less interested in Beyonce here than I am in the relation of media to performance, and also in the design of Esdetlin. online of Beyonce. But what's great about this clip in particular, and I just don't have time to go through it with you, this on the stage is a giant spinning LED cube. And it separates and it gets lit up on all sides. And what's amazing is that in the middle of this, so just to the right of our faithful phone camera person, is a continuation of the stage that comes out into the middle of the audience. And there's a wonderful moment where Beyonce she comes out into that middle and our camera person follows along, right, with the phone, and then realizes that, like, they can't see anything anymore. And so the phone pivots back to the giant spinning cube, right? And there's this moment of tension, right, where it's like, do I keep filming? But it's like the back, I can't really see her. Oh, but that's a much better view. And, you know, very much in line with what Phil Oslinder was observing in the 99 issue, version of Liveness, as he's sort of talking about our relationship to the live and its presence. I'm starting to run a little short of time, so I'm going to sort of skip ahead of some of this stuff here. But what got me thinking about this was less about Beyonce and the video part of it, and more this relationship to the box and the significance of the box. And so I'm going to make a little bit of a kind of play here, a kind of argument for the centrality of boxes, unless there's something really amazing that's popped up. Nope. I mean, not that there's nothing amazing here, I just don't see anything, new. Which is this idea of a lack of separation between spaces. And this has come out in a number of the papers, the ways in which these distinctions, private, public, fixed, mobile, creation, reception, have kind of played out. And the other one I would sort of point to here is this book from 2017, The Mediated Construction of Reality by social theorists Nick Poldry and Andreas Hepp, in which they talk about the fact that there's really no pure face-to-face communication anymore, that every face-to-face exchange is contained within this notion of media. And potential mediatization, right? So there's no sunset, there's just like the Instagram photo you haven't taken yet. There was just a thing, I think in the New York Times or the Guardian about like now is the great era of long distance relationships. But in some ways it's like, we're all in long distance relationships. Like how much time do we actually spend with anyone versus, going through some kind of media, and even when we're sitting at the table trying to be good, like not allowed to wear my Apple Watch at the dinner table. This is part of the issue. There's this kind of conflation that happens. This is another, and I'm just going to kind of play this without sound here. This is, I'm kind of obsessed with this family, if you haven't noticed already. I'm letting the kids get a little older before I start doing analyses on them, but they're just great. This is an ad from 2006 with Jay-Z for Hewlett-Packard, in which he talks about the Hewlett-Packard's computer tagline at this point was the computer is personal again, or the PC is personal. And so what they literally did here was to make Jay-Z, I'm totally in the way of this, I'm sorry. And now the people at home can't hear me anymore, so this will be secret conversation between you and me. But they basically have, he's going through and talking about all the things he does with his computer, right? So he checks his stocks, he travels, he's, building a center for the Nets, right? And he is the computer, right? And the computer is personal again. Like there's no distinction between, right, him as a body, him as a self, him as a corporate entity. Hello again, sorry. Did you miss me? And his productivity, right? I've never seen a better clip for neoliberalism than this, right? I just play it all the time. Okay, but this is, of course, going back to McLuhan, has a longer history. This is another favorite work of mine. This is Namjoon Paik's TV Buddha from 1974, which I really like kind of contemplating. Get it? I like contemplating in the context of self-surveillance, but also self-reflection, right? And again, to see the self in the television, the sort of prototype of social media and self-reflection. And I love comparing this artwork to those meditation apps. right? Or even better, to the screen time thing that's supposed to like measure your screen time so you use less of it. I'm like, genius, right? So that may be an answer to the end of the carnivalesque, right? I mean, it's like once you like kind of get into like measuring your screen time to reduce it.
Except all the means that I haven't been writing that, but my screen goes down.
That's because you are not mastering the tools of productivity. Can I sell you a couple of books, right? Or the toggle app, which will let you measure your time so that you can do a contemplative self-analysis on how well or how poorly you are doing. Another kind of work that I've been really loving is temporary distortions. My voice has an echo in it. This is a durational 6-hour performance of music in a box that is entirely lined with two-way mirrors on the inside. So we see in as audience members and we can hear them if we put on headphones. Take a picture quick because I'm about to change slides. They're great. You should totally bring them. I love this piece. But if you're inside, you just see yourself in a parallax view, right? You just see yourself in a mirror, which of course literalizes our relationship to social media production, right? Like we're totally riffing on our own image, imagining that there is an audience out there for it. And maybe there are and maybe there aren't. What's amazing is in talking to Kenneth Collins, who's the artistic director of Temporary Distortion, and the guy behind this is he's also the dude in the sunglasses with the long crazy beard, is that in almost all the performances of this, people are really well behaved, except that one time they did this and a bunch of teenagers came in, and all the teenagers did was like bang on the glass. So they were like in there, and all of a sudden they really can't see anything, and all of a sudden people it really kind of freaked him out and made for a very weird show. But again, it's sort of like, this idea of the box, right? The televisual, our desire to literalize the boxes. It's almost as if we can build the walls that exist and physicalize them. They will give us some comfort. The Dutch performance artist Louise Verhoeven has done a similar kind of project. You probably may be familiar with this from 2014. Wanna Play or Love in the Time of Grinder caused a big sensation in Berlin when he got into some trouble. I won't go into all of that right now, but look it up, it's fabulous. And terrible, it's terrible. And problematic and kind of amazing at the same time. He basically lived in a box and solicited engagement for intimate non-sexual acts with people using Grindr and then eventually other social media apps. But he lived in the box pretty much full time. And when he was in Utrecht, I was talking with my friends who were there. They set him up in the public square. And Utrecht is not a huge city, and so everybody, if you're kind of doing anything in Utrecht at any time of year, you will pass through this, one of the kind of central plots. And so people referred to him like a pet. They were like, we check on him, and like in his terrarium, and see what he was doing in there. His next piece also kind of plays with a similar idea of virtual intimacy and engagement. He made a piece called Guilty Landscapes. And this is again, kind of gets to this question of the ways in which like screens that work and talk back and how we literalize some of this. So these were video pieces that you observed in a gallery, but in doing so you would realize that the person in the scene, and these were all scenes of trauma, ecological, political, cultural, exploited, etc., that the person in the space was actually responding to you in real time by imitating and mimicking your body posture, and then was encouraging you to do the same. So thinking about the televisual as an interactive technology. This one is in home Syria. And then the last piece that I'll say a little bit about, and then we can sort of open up for virtual material questions, and I'll hang around as long as anyone else is interested. Is this piece, Ethos, by Chris Verdon, Belgian artist. If you're hanging out with Peter Eckersall, I'm sure you know quite a bit about Chris Verdon. So I won't go into more detail here. For those of you, again, playing along at home, you'll just have to bring Peter into your space. But this one also is all performance within boxes. And so it's an array of 9 boxes in which you look through 3D glasses, stereoscopic glasses at a 3-dimensional image that is projected on a screen, put in the bottom of a box that is gridded, so it really reinforces the 3-dimensional effect. And so when you look in the top, you see these what appear to be very small-scaled humans, but are otherwise identical. So it creates quite an uncanny, unsettling experience. And then you watch them kind of go through these various scenes. This one is the most significant. It's like all of them. It's taken from J.G. Ballard's writings, most prominently the Atrocity Exhibition. And this piece is one where he talks about 2 people being caught in a time loop. And the man at some point tries to hug the television. He realizes he's caught in a time loop because the same thing keeps appearing on the television. And so he goes and he grabs the television in an attempt to hug the TV to make the time loop stop. And if you know that work, right, Atrocity Exhibition, you will know that it is also written in these boxes, right? That the paragraphs are literal boxes on the page. And our engagement with it is very much like the television. So again, the private, the inside, the outside. What can we affect, what we can't affect? But the other wonderful thing is that as you're watching this, it occurs to you all of a sudden, like, you too are hugging a television, right? Because you're leaning over this thing, you know, grabbing it. And so if I had any kind of final image, these are just more from, this one's kind of weird too, so you can see my face in it. Right, so this is me taking a picture, and you can sort of see my silhouette hovering over the box. It's this idea of the box is now, for me, becoming a kind of organizing principle of understanding media, and particularly the relations between theater and media, on a kind of, not even one, but on multiple spectra of comparisons. And I really see a lot of this work that I learned and was thinking about from the pre-conference, which was really focused on teaching, to the main conference, and sort of thinking about this, performances like the hyper-present and system, I think, touch on this as well. But really thinking through, what is our responsibility now in terms of making theater, in terms of understanding theater, and how can we use theater, not just to understand media, because I actually feel like we get there pretty quickly. I don't think this audience needs much convincing. It's making the case for the value of theater and theatrical vocabulary in helping media makers and the larger public understand more critically the media that they are consuming and participating in. Like, how do we understand the performances that we are generating all the time and create a kind of critical culture in response to that that doesn't just involve us breaking all of our beautiful screens. So anyway, that's all I have for now. Thank you so much for inviting me. They've got a deadline, you've got a deadline, and folks in better places to be.
Time maybe for a couple of real questions.
I am also open to the fake questions, and the artificial questions, and the imposter questions, and the simulated questions. And yes, somebody notes we are all in a white box now. Yes, the white box.
Hi, sir. I really appreciate the talk, and I'm kind of having difficulty grapple with the notion of the box. I kind of think of the black box, the flight, which, especially in the aircraft, we have some disaster, then we try to locate the black box and trying to know the truth through that device. Sort of, it's like it preserves all the truths. And in terms of theater, we also have black box theater, which is kind of a metaphor for theater as the place where we preserve all of our authenticities and the truths. In contrast with on the screen, which we sometimes think about as false, as shallow, or something like that. So I'm kind of having hard time to understand why you use that term box. So can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, thank you for that. The whole notion of a box. So if I'm understanding your question correctly, and please, jump in if I'm not, right? What you're saying is like we have these, the literal black boxes that we have on airplanes, and we have the metaphorical sense, although they're actual, right? Black boxes of theater is somehow holding authenticity versus screens that are a domain of simulacra, right? And we can factor in the white cube of the aesthetic in terms of representational space in the art gallery and all the connotations of high art and falsity perhaps that goes along with that, or at least a certain kind of attention to artificiality. For me, what's useful, or the kind of the key here for me is that the box in all of these scenarios is both literal and metaphoric, right? Like the black box on the airplane is an actual box of recording technology, but those truths, right, are often contested, are rarely clear, and I would say similarly in the space of theater, right? I mean, we can think about it in terms of authenticity, but it is always a kind of tension of the real and how real that is. What I think is useful is that the box, for me, seems to have proliferated, and I was particularly struck with the number of boxes that were showing up in contemporary performance, in everything from Chris Verdonk to Beyonce, and the ways in which these boxes seem to function in a whole bunch of different ways, but at their core, and this is why Verdonk I think is super interesting, it really became a kind of a deeper screen. And if you think about ways of, like, it basically is the screen is no longer a two-dimensional representational object, right? Like in some ways, if you think about the ways that screens, or when they sort of do ads for projectors, right, it kind of casts this light beam that creates a kind of geometric space in which we can live. And so I've been thinking out, and there's some weirdnesses in how I'm doing this, and this format is probably not my clearest. But I just think like these things are really held in tension, that becomes useful for me in terms of thinking about them in relation to the box. And beyond that, thinking of how artists are now also, many different kinds of artists gravitating to boxes as somehow an organizing principle for making work, either as a projection screen, or as an immersive space, or as a functional, and that it pulls both, again, this idea of the closer we get to the digital, the more we seem to approach theater, that in fact, as we kind of dig into the digital and the screen, we seem to get more and more theatrical boxes, in which the whole negotiation of real and authenticity is always kind of, in play, but also contested. Does that kind of help this is how I'm thinking. Yes, Jean?
Thanks, Sarah, for this. That was great. Always love listening to you.
I appreciate that.
I know it's kind of a weird thing, but I'm not going into the mix because I've seen a lot of productions recently, mostly in Latin America, because that's America, and they're cardboard boxes.
Okay.
So there actually is this kind of recycling and almost an artisanal bit.
Yeah.
That I find kind of existing in some kind of tension with the examples that you provided. I wanted to ask you about that. And then the other is, because I know your other work on text, I was really interested in how text, and you brought the ballad into it, also the text on the page and framed and boxed. What are your thoughts these days on how text functions in these projects?
So I think you probably know better than I do, but I would not say that the artisanal box or the cardboard box is less at play here as well. It's because it plays into the same notion of container. And the other part of the Verdonk work in particular that he has talked about with ethos is the idea of it relating to the ISO, which is the governing body that sets the ship container sizes so that they are accessible in every port everywhere in the world. And that every ship can carry the exact same stuff, right, regardless of where it comes from or where it's going. that is also the governing body that organizes internet protocols to allow for information transmission to be seamless globally, regardless of what spaces. So there is also an implication, and I believe it's Shane Boyle who's done work on this, on container theater, right? So, and the repurposing of those kind of shipping containers, those excuse me, those standardized shipping containers. So I think there is also a way in which capitalism and commerce and circulation, whether it be, you know, the standardization of objects and the way, like, you know, your IKEA couch can all, you know, everything can fit into a kind of set number of boxes for maximum global capital efficiency, is not so different than, and is closely related to also the internet protocols that allow for transmission of goods and services and information towards the same purpose in terms of global capital. And I think that handmade boxes, of which Temporary Distortion have been making these, you know, since the 90s, and you know, Big Art Group is another one that often builds and destroys their own boxes and does a lot of stuff with technology, that there is a kind of materiality, again, that literalizes the metaphoric boxes that I think we feel ourselves in, right? And I think the screens look less and less to us like windows in the way that they were perhaps initially conceived, and less like desktops, and more like cubicles and boxes that we live in. And so I think this is sort of part of the thesis, is that artists are basically, and especially those who are working at and close to different kinds of media technologies, are literalizing their own confinement, so that at least it's something we can see and agree on. Because, and this goes to questions that had come up earlier about, you know, power in the, you know, panopticon, that it's the invisible power structures that are the most threatening. And I think when we're under surveillance by ourselves and our loved ones, you know, quite intentionally, that there is a kind of anxiety there. And so there's something about the literalizing of boxes, and then to create resistant boxes. So broken boxes, cardboard boxes, disposable boxes, I think participates in the same kind of intellectual creative project from a different lens. In terms of text, gosh, you know, I have a ton of notes from this weekend. One of the things that I kept writing down in a number of panels was, and you know, if you know my early work, I was like, Gertrude Stein, it's Gertrude Stein again, right? And this idea of repetition, you know, I was thinking of your piece earlier today in the live writing, and so I was thinking of her and automatic writing and the surrealists, right? This idea that somehow trying to get to something authentic and felt that lives in an in-between, that articulates ideas in motion and bodies in motion and sort of in between, that I find, so I feel like text is kind of sitting in the same way too. I'm also fascinated by, and I don't have anything more interesting to say than I am fascinated by, the ways in which like text, like theater, seems to be the thing that will not die. Right? You know, and so it's like Instagram thing, it seems like we're gonna completely get rid of text, and then it's like, no, everybody wants to put like text on top of their photos, and then it's like, oh, we're all gonna, you know, turn into, you know, emojis, and then people make their little bitmojis, right, which are like the little emojis that look like them, and then they put text with them, you know, and so it's just like this idea of the sort of durability of language. And again, I think maybe as a resistance strategy, you know, is text the cardboard box of, you know, of digital culture? I'm not sure. Yeah, Janet, I mean, do we have time? I don't want to hold people hostage.
I think we do not have time for more questions, but please continue the conversation with us, with Sarah, at the archive. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much.